Today I am inspired to talk about like a little bit more detail about the book and the inspiration and how it evolved. I mentioned it on the website, and originally when I started writing, I thought I was going to be writing a very different book. I had been becoming aware of these key words as I was starting to open up about my spirituality and my personal growth and personal development. And there were these words that kept repeating in conversations, on websites, in emails, online and in books. And I started to sort of take note of these words. And by the end of my awareness to them, I think there was 37 different cue cards that I had put these words on, and they were words like gratitude and thoughts and habits, like vibration and ready to hear, these kind of things. And so my intention originally was to write about all of these words surrounding law of attraction in a scientific, a positive, a negative, and an experiential way, so that when readers would read about these different keywords, they would be able to identify with them from at least one of these 4 different sort of descriptions. So as I started digging into each of one of these words and writing more deeply about them, journaling and just sort of enveloping myself in them, I started to see this other theme that was emerging from the experiential descriptions. And that is the story that was really crying out to be written. It was this personal experience of my own. And I didn't start out writing a memoir. That was never my intention, but that is essentially what it became, and what wanted to come out of me, and the story wanted to be told. So as I started listening to what was coming up and opening myself up and turning my attention to that, things and new learnings really started pouring in. There is one book that I gravitated towards about suicide called Silent Grief: Living in the Wake of Suicide. And as I was reading this, there was so many stories of other people that had experienced suicide and that were suicide survivors. Their stories were so comforting, as difficult as they were to read, because they reflected and sort of like mirrored my own experience. And so things that they would say, I had thought to myself so many times, but I'd never been able to have these conversations with anybody but within my own head. So to be able to read them and to be able to relate to them and to be able to be comforted by them, it was a really new experience for me. And the context of the book, Silent Grief, is about these suicide survivor support groups that are available, and the conversations that have come out of that, and the bigger lessons that have really shone through from these essentially treatment sessions that people are coming together and having with each other. I didn't even know that was a possibility. I had never heard of a suicide survivor support group. I mean, I'd heard of other support groups. I remember watching Fight Club, and there's Tyler Durden, and he's going to testicular cancer and breast cancer and brain parasites and all these other support groups, in the basement of these community centers and churches and all the rest, right? And I really truly had no idea that there was such a thing as a suicide survivor support group. in Silent Grief, they sort of explain what it looks like to participate in one of these. And they say it usually starts off with like a potluck gathering, and then they move into, a circle and have their conversations from there. And within that conversation, each person in the group gets to introduce themselves, say who it was that they lost, say how it happened, when it happened, and how they're feeling about it now. So there's sort of these 5 main questions that each person answers, and the group holds space for them as they are able to tell this story. And sometimes someone will come out and say, I really hear what you're saying, that happened to me, or there'll be other conversations of support as this person is talking. And that's what became kind of like the plot of my book, essentially. It laid the foundation for how I was going to share my experience with others. And so in Celebrate Your Grief, I begin by imagining myself coming up with a potluck dish to bring to this suicide survivor support group, and the emotion that experience would have on me. And I mean, for me, just coming up with a dish to bring to a potluck, I mean, that's unnerving enough as it is. And then to think about like being super vulnerable and going to that place of deep pain and emotion, and explaining, who I was that I lost and how I lost them and when it happened. It just immense amount of emotion was pouring out of me as I'm, typing this on the computer, trying to visualize and imagine being in this experience. And so each part of the book now, part 1 through 5, is the answer to one of these questions. I introduce myself in part 1, and in part 2 I introduce who I lost, and then in part 3 I go into how it happened, and part 4 I go into why it happened. I can't remember if those are in order or not. And then in part 5 I'm like, how am I feeling about it now? And it's as though, I attended or have attended frequently one of these suicide survivor support groups, and just the telling of my story has been so fundamental for me in my healing process. And even though I never had access to a group like this, I feel like now you, as my readers and my watchers and my community, are that group, that support group, and you are holding space for me always when you're listening to my stories, to my lives in my YouTube videos. And I'm so grateful for those opportunities to be able to, continue to facilitate that healing. And it is so important, and it's been, shown to me time and time again how my opening up about my experience gives others that same space to be able to open up about their experience. That is where the transformations really start to take place. So I invite you, if you are in a place of grief, if you've experienced suicide in your own life, if you're a suicide survivor, to reach out to me and share your story. I am so open to hearing about those experiences, and I hold space for you. Thank you again so much for listening, and I look forward to our next conversation. Bye.